Hey folks, today we are going to take a look at the editing process. And to do that, we're going to edit an episode of the What's New Westford podcast. So, what I've already done so far is I've recorded the podcast and I've imported that file here into my sequences folder. I have my project library organized. I have a folder for raw footage, for sequences, for sound and graphics, and for any utility sequences that I might end up making along the way. It really helps a lot to have all of this kind of stuff when you edit a show that has a lot of different episodes, because you'll create something new every time and eventually it'll get all cluttered and you won't be able to find the things that you're looking for. So just putting some things into basic categories using folders here, or bins as they call them in Premiere, is a good idea. So the very first step in the process is I'm going to right click on my source footage and create a new sequence from the clip, take that source footage and drop it into the raw footage folder. The name of the sequence is the name of the footage, and that's what I wanted it to be. We'll go back and change that at the end if we come up with a name. But so you can see we have just our track. It is about 36 minutes long. And for the very first thing, I'm just going to go back to an old episode and grab some of the setup materials. We're going to copy paste a few pieces out of the last project, pop that up onto video 2, make sure we're not going to overwrite anything. We'll paste those two pieces into place. And what that is I have here my intro track with two markers in it. And those markers are key points that we'll get to in just a moment. And then the video 1 track is just my underlying graphic that whenever I fade out on my main track, it will have the graphic there underneath, and it will be as if I was inserting a graphic, but it's just going to be there on video 1 for whenever I want to go to it. So we will bring our clip down, and we're going to find our first point of conversation, the first word, which I can see on the waveform should be right about here.
Hi, folks. This is What's New Westford, the podcast where we talk about what's happening here in Westford.
Right, that's where we want to cut in. So most of this nonsense before this point will get cut. We're going to just chop all that off. And this is where those two markers come in. The first marker is the video in point. The second marker is the audio in point. So I'm going to cut this to where I want it for the audio in point, and I'll set it right on that marker. Then I'm going to unlink my footage, just extend that video clip, and relink it. That creates a nice little L edit. We're going to go in there and throw on a video transition. There. We have the start of our show all ready to go. We just started editing.
Hi, folks. This is What's New Westford, the podcast where we talk about...
All right, there we go. So there's our intro. It's nice to have something done already. The rest of the editing process will not be that way. It'll be a little slower. But the very first thing that we want to do is clean up this studio audio. And to do that, we're going to just go grab from the last project, go grab the Denoise Filter, the graphic equalizer, and the dynamics processor. Select all three of those, copy, pop back over, and paste it into place. There we go. And we want to have specifically the denoiser first in the stack, the equalizer second, and the dynamics third. And so what each of these filters do, this is just a quick way to clean up your audio. The denoiser goes through the raw file and it looks for any weird noises and just filters them out based on its algorithm, and it looks for background noise and fan noise and electronic noise and that sort of thing, and it just kind of subtracts that from your track and makes it sound a little bit cleaner. The next thing is the graphic equalizer, which I like to kind of suppress the bass a little bit and boost the midtones The human voice tends to be in this area, and then you tend to get a lot of undesirable noise under 60 hertz and stuff above 16 kilohertz. Nobody can hear anyway, so in order to keep that from becoming a problem, just roll those two off. And then this is, I found, the equalizer curve that I like best. This section is very much up to whatever you want to do. I think this is just the vocal boost preset in there in Adobe that I have then also just rolled down the ends. And this gives kind of a nice boost to the voices without making things too bassy or no, not too much pop from the treble. Makes your voice come across nice and clearly, which is good for a podcast. And then after you've equalized and denoised, you also then want to apply a dynamics processor. That's going to do a few things. We have an auto gate in here so that when people are not talking, we don't hear any background hiss. Anything that goes below 40 decibels will just get cut off. We have a compressor on here to try and level out the peaks and valleys in the audio a little bit. It's really important to have smooth audio, especially when you're uploading to the internet. If you're going to have a movie in a movie theater, then you can have a much higher dynamic range because those speakers are going to be turned up way loud. But if you're just making videos for YouTube, you want to have a nice, smooth audio level. And having a compressor on there, not too strong. A ratio of 4 is probably about as high as you want to go. But a little bit of a compressor on there will just help to smooth everything out so that you don't have loud spots and quiet spots. And then the expander also just helps push up and away from the noise floor. So that's what the dynamics processor does. And without those, this is what my clip sounds like.
Hi, folks. This is What's New Westford, the podcast where we talk about what's happening here in Westford. I'm Steve from WestfordCAT, here with our remote correspondent, Alex Svensson.
And here's what it sounds like with those three in place.
Hi, folks. This is What's New Westford, the podcast where we talk about what's happening here in Westford.
So you can hear the voice has a little bit more of a pop to it. It sounds a little bit richer. And also there's not a little bit of a background hiss in there. If you listen very closely, you might be able to hear a little bit of that. Certainly if you're listening with your speakers turned way up, you're going to hear that background hiss. So that the dynamics processor, the denoiser, do a lot to get rid of that. But that has just been applied to our entire video track. It is important to do this on the first step because then you don't have to go back and mess with settings and copy paste things between clips. Because beyond this point, we are going to chop this clip up quite a bit. So let's get into it. We're just going to watch through and find the end of the intro.
Hi, folks. This is What's New Westford. So, Alex, what's new in Westford?
All right. There's the cue. We're just going to put a cut there. We will note that we have the little white triangles here. That means that those are sequential frames. So we don't need to put a transition on it if we don't tighten that up at all, which there wasn't much of a pause in there, so we'll probably just leave it. Now I need to go back again to an earlier episode. I'm going to grab some of the graphics. We'll put those on track 3. Sorry, there's one. There's the other. So that's going to be the first story graphic. And we need to find where I'm talking about liking
thanks for coming on, Alex. We're happy to have you here. And our other guest today is Christy Bates, the president of our board of directors here at the station. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, Alex.
Nick Woodbury is once again running the technical end of our show. The stories on today's rundown are a bill to address the opioid crisis, a change in state districts, and a spike in COVID detected in Boston's wastewater. Links will be in the description as always, and feel free to tell us what you think about these stories in the comments. So, Alex, what's new in West?
So that's pretty much right spot on where we want it. You can see I saw as it was playing that this is the frame where my audio begins. I figured that was probably where I said the line that was the cue for this graphic to pop in. So I just popped it right down there and it lines up perfectly. So we don't have to do anything more with that. So for the first story, I'm not going to worry about going and getting the name of the story and filling it in here, but that will be a later step. We're just putting the clip in place and then we can make adjustments to it on the next pass. But this clip will change and it will be the name and writer of the first story that we are about to talk about. So now we're just going to kind of sit back and watch the conversation, and we'll make some cuts where we need to cut. If we need to cut something out, we'll pause and do that. But really, at this point, the podcast is in 3 sections, 3 topics, with then some interstitial pieces, and we're just gonna play through it and identify anything that needs to get cut out and break up those pieces. So here we go.
Hi, Steve. Thank you for having me. So, substances, legal substances that have been state regulated.
Now, as you're hearing this, you may notice there's a little bit of static in Alex's voices, and that's something we can't really do much about. He was connected over Zoom, and Zoom is a highly compressed audio format. So whereas Christy and I were on nice fancy studio microphones, and Alex was also, you can see his nice fancy studio microphone there, but our microphones were being recorded directly as a raw feed, uncompressed, and so we got full quality audio, and what we were getting from Alex was transmitted over the internet. So if you notice that his microphone sounds a little bit rougher, that's why. And unfortunately, there's not much I can do to eliminate that kind of staticky pop that you might hear a little bit in the background of his words. It's always better to do your recording locally when you can.
And that are an alternative to opioids. So, like,
All right, so let's move on to our next story.
All right, so here we have arrived at the end of the first discussion. So we're going to cut out a little bit of that stuff at the end of there.
So let's move on to our next story.
And we'll cut that part out because that's a little bit of behind the scenes direction that we don't need to include. Cut out the
We have redistricting, and this is we have
just start on redistricting,
and this is the I just have to warn viewers, there's two different efforts going on here, and one is called redistricting, the other is called reprecincting, and it's easy.
So at this point we're actually going to go back, and that sentence doesn't really make sense if I cut out all the first bits of it.
All right, so
we're just going to cut it there.
Let's move on to our next story, which we have redistricting, and this is the.
Now, if I had said our next story is redistricting, that would have been much better, but this is what I gave myself to work with, so that's what I'm dealing with. And the reason there needs to be a cut here in between these two is because we are going to insert a little ding-dong here. That's going to go on audio 2. It's going to start playing. We're going to start it on the end of the audio from the previous interview clip, and we're going to pull the audio from the next interview clip so that it lines up right on that marker there. And then we're going to do a little thing that is a little unnecessary, but I like to create kind of L edits for the fade here. We're a bit too far zoomed out, so we'll zoom in here. I'm just going to grab each of these clips, pull them out by 1 second. Relink them. And then I can go into audio effect or into video effects, grab a transition here, and set it to 1 second. And then it covers that whole cut.
That they want to suggest.
Let's move on to our next story.
And there is our transition between items. Now at this point, I usually just go straight into the second story. Depending on how many stories we have, we might go back and put in the mid break or part of the mid break, one of the two mid breaks. But we'll leave that out for now, and if we want to put it in here, we'll come back to it later. It's really going to depend on how long each item is, and so right now we're almost 10 minutes in, so that's actually a pretty good 10-10-10 breakdown. But sometimes you get one item that's really, really short, and that might change where I decide to put the interstitial pieces. But now we're just going to get back into it and listen through the next conversation. Anything that needs to get cut out will get cut out. There wasn't anything to cut out in the first conversation, so that was good. So we're just going to go through and get the second conversation on here.
Let's move on to our next story, which we have redistricting.
Yeah. So I believe that some of you see more in places like New Hampshire than Massachusetts. But
That's believable.
All right, so here we've got what I would call an optional segment. So from about here to about here, we talk about gerrymandering, and it's kind of a side conversation. Now, I don't have like a hard time limit on this podcast. You can see right now our media duration is about 36 minutes, a little bit under 36 minutes, but I have one episode that went up to 47. So if I was looking to keep this episode under half an hour, this section might be something that I would cut out, both because it is kind of a little non sequitur of a topic that just kind of spun off a side path in the forest of all knowledge that we were wandering through. But also because if we go and actually look at the waveforms here, like that's a nice quiet spot, makes for a clean cut. And then there's another kind of a little pause like that at the end that would make for a nice clean cut. Kind of breaks in the conversation there. And those would be good points to cut off this conversation and move on to the next conversation. But I don't feel any need to rush here, so I'm going to leave that bit in.
All right, let's move on to our third topic, which is a spike detector.
But we are going to put a cut there because that is the beginning of the third topic. And now we need to go and add some of our mid segments. So if we go back and take a look at the last episode, we can see that after the end of the conversation, there's a little kind of an intro to the mid-break. Then there's the actual mid-break, and then there's the outro to the mid-break before we get into part 3. So those parts are on the end of my raw recording, and we're going to have to come back to them. But I am going to copy this mid-break here and make sure that I have enough space to drop it in. There we go. We have a mid-break. And we'll go back and adjust the edges of this later when we have our interstitial pieces all cut out. But now we're just going to move on to the third section. There was nothing on the second section that I really needed to cut out, so let's just keep rolling.
All right, let's move on to our third topic, which is a spike detected in COVID.
It's definitely a controversial subject. It's a whole subject of its own.
Yep. I think if that's all we've got on that, then we'll
It's a whole subject of its own.
All right, there's a good cut point for the end of the third discussion. There's a little bit of background coming up here.
If that's all we've got on that, then we'll wrap things up. So I
cut that out.
I did skip over all my midpoint stuff, so I'm just going to go back through and read all of those, and then we'll do the outro, and then we'll be done. And good timing too.
There's a little bit of behind the scenes for you.
Thanks for listening.
The first word. So we'll just cut all that stuff out. And this is my midpoint break. I think this is for announcements.
Thanks for listening. Before we continue, I have a couple of quick announcements. Westford Academy basketball starts this month, and
this is actually needs to get cut out because this didn't end up happening. We didn't get enough of a crew, so we're just gonna slice that little piece of it out, and that will create a jump cut here. Not much of a jump cut. You can see only a bit of a blip there. But just to cover that, what I like to do is come up, find my VR Chroma Leaks. We'll put that on there just as a little 10-frame transition.
The first game is Tuesday.
And it calls it out as a transition. We can clearly see that, hey, there's a transition there. But it's nicer looking than the jump cut.
December 14th against Acton Boxborough, and you can watch it live on the Education Channel.
Oh, I didn't cut out
which is Verizon Channel 33, Comcast Channel 99, or on WestfordCAT's website. Due to a conflict with the select board, the game won't be live on YouTube, but we will be posting the recording there later in the week.
Well, due to a conflict with not having enough crew members, the game will not be recorded. Sorry, folks.
The annual...
All right, that's a bit bigger of a jump cut, so we're going to throw the VR leaks on there.
The annual Charlie Brown Christmas concert at the PCA is back in person this year, hopefully, performed by Aidan Scrimgour and friends. Now we're going to take a quick break and come back.
All right, we can leave in my little bit of gushing about how good Aidan played that album, but we're going to then cut to the last piece.
Now we're going to take a quick break and come back for more after a word from our station.
And that's the cue to the second piece of the midpoint break.
We're back with more news and discussion. Just a quick reminder.
And that's the return.
Links to these stories are in the description if you want more information. And don't be afraid to leave a comment telling us what you think about any of these articles.
All right, and this last bit is the outro to the podcast.
Thanks for listening, folks. We hope this leaves you a little better informed about your town. If you like this episode, tell YouTube to share it with your neighbors by clicking on the like button, and tell us what you think about these stories in the comments. Thanks again to Nick for recording. to Christy for joining us in the studio, and to Alex for telling us what's new in Westford.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys both.
Too much of a pause there, so we are not going to leave in their thank yous and goodbyes. We're just going to cut that all out and end the episode. All right, we're going to hop back to our last episode. Scroll down and grab our closing outro music. Toss that on audio 1 and extend our graphic to cover. Then we're going to grab our subscribe reminder and our credits. Oh, gotta hit the copy button and pop those on there. Line those up a little better.
Thanks for listening, folks. We hope this leaves you a little better informed about your town. If you like this episode,
there's where the subscribe goes. And then that puts the credits into the perfect location. So we'll come in and edit those credits. These are just done through the built-in essential graphics. So I can click on them and change that. All right, there we go. And there's our outro.
And to Alex for telling us what's new in Westford.
It's a little tight on the end. I'm going to actually give it a couple frames back.
To Christy for joining us in the studio, and to Alex for telling us what's new in Westford.
There we go. Like the flow on that. Alright, so now we're going to go back for the second pass. Grab this graphic from the first story and paste it into place on the second story. Then jump forward and paste it into place on the third story. And we're going to lock this graphic layer so that we don't move it around when we use the track select tool to make a spot here. Go grab those pieces.
Before we continue, I have a couple of quick announcements.
Those are the pieces I'm looking for. I think I need a bigger hole for them. Drop those in on V2. And let's see. This is the outro.
Now we're going to take a quick break and come back for more after a word from our...
That will go there. And then we have this piece. It's going to go right in here.
We're back with more news and discussion. Just a quick reminder, links to these stories are in the description if you want more information. And don't be afraid to leave a comment telling us what you think about any of these articles.
All right, now we need transitions for all of these cuts that we just added. We can unlock this layer since we're done moving stuff.
Thanks for listening.
That's going to be Chroma Leak.
Before we continue, I have a couple of quick announcements. The annual Charlie Brown Christmas concert at the PCA is back in person.
Turns out it was only one announcement, but that's okay. They'll never notice it was long.
Doing it so well. Now we're going to take a...
There's another little bit of a jump cut that we'll cover with some VR Chroma Leaks. And there's one more jump cut
about any of these articles.
Alright, and we want to also go through and listen to the audio timing on all of these and just make sure that it flows fairly smoothly through here.
So I believe that some of you see more in places like New Hampshire than Massachusetts. But
yep, that's believable. Thanks for listening. Before we continue, I have a couple of quick announcements. The annual Charlie Brown Christmas concert at the PCA is back in person.
All right, that sounds good.
The original Charlie Brown and just performing it so well. Now we're going to take a quick break and come back from.
That needs a little bit of breathing room, don't you think? Just a little. Not a whole second, maybe like half a second. 10 frames, we'll give it a shot.
Fantastic job at capturing the original Charlie Brown and just performing it so well. Now we're going to take a quick break and come back from.
I could even give it a little bit more.
The original Charlie Brown and just performing it so well. Now we're going to take a quick break and come back for more after a word from our state.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Gives you kind of a beat to pause and move on. All right, now we want to fade into this, and we're going to do kind of the same thing that we did in between topics. Just create a little bit of an L here. And dissolve it out. We'll head down to the other end, do the same thing in reverse. And
For more after a word from our station.
There is our midpoint break.
You can come back for more after a word from our station.
WestfordCAT is more than just television.
All right, and on the wave out.
We're back with.
All right, the way out looks good. All right, we can tighten this up. Tighten up that ending, close all the gaps, make sure everything is still lined up. We want to throw chroma leaks on the transition there. And we're going to do one more time on the fade out with a little bit of an L. All right, now we are just about done. So the last step here is to go through and make sure that all of the graphics are corrected. We didn't fill in the individual story graphics, so this is where we get to go back and put the names of the stories on everything. So I'm going to go into the controls for the first graphic and paste my text into place. Make sure that, yeah, see, that's a little bit messy. So let's make it 2 lines. Yeah, that looks better. And then this is by Alex. And we can go to the second graphic, and we're just going to do the same thing. Yeah, that's kind of messy. There we go. And down to the third graphic. Grammatically, the correct place to cut this would be here. Yeah, I guess that looks better. Levels yet sticks out less far than Boston was sticking out when we did Boston on the top line, and Boston wastewater should be kept together. So that'll work. And then, let's see, this was by Amanda Kaufman of the Boston Globe. All right. We have our 3-story graphics good. Our intro subscribe graphic is easy. We don't need to adjust that. Our outro subscribe graphic is the same. We've got all of our credits all set. The sound level of my outro here is pushing up to about -12. And if we go back throughout the project,
House, they were having a debate as well.
This leaves you a little better informed about.
let's go to any random
in the
spot
Boston hospitals, would that impact?
along the way.
Some of the towns to this.
It's actually not.
Our current district includes Lowell, and
So people can easily get addicted to them. They would help kind of
Scratch cornea, and
Yeah, so everything is pushing up to that -12 level. So that means that we have a nice consistent audio level all the way across, even though if you look at the waveform here, there's little ups and downs. Everything is right around kind of like -11 to -13, maybe -14. And that gives us a pretty narrow dynamic range that will be pleasant to listen to on headphones or car speakers or computer speakers. So that's it. That's the whole process. The last thing in here would be to go through and pick a name. I'll do that later. So this is all done, and we are going to Control M to export and render this thing out so that we can upload it and send it off for you folks to listen to. So there we go. And that is the editing process for What's New Westford. So thank you folks for joining me. I hope this gave you a good kind of a behind the scenes look into how editing works and what goes into editing one of our podcasts. So thanks for watching.